to working fundamental freedoms, covering freedom of movement, migrant workers, and the integration of legal migrants. My name is Christine Hurst. I'm Deputy Head of the ODIHR Democratization Department. Very happy that you've joined the session this afternoon. A very important topic, particularly at the current time. In terms of freedom of movement, people need to be able to move freely in order to explore opportunities for their personal and their family's well-being, to fully realize their potential, access a range of other guaranteed rights, and contribute to the development of society. OSCE participating states have committed to guarantee the right to freedom of movement within their territory to their citizens, as well as to foreigners lawfully residing on their territory. Progress has been made through decisions to liberalize visa regimes, unilateral steps, or as a result of political dialogue, but limitations do remain. In terms of migrant workers and the integration of legal migrants, OSCE participating states made commitments in the area of migration almost 30 years ago, recognizing that the issues of protection and promotion of the rights of legally resident migrant workers and their family members have a human dimension. States recognize the need to elaborate or strengthen national integration strategies and programs, including migrants' active engagement, and to ensure their national migration practices comply with relevant international obligations and OSCE commitments, and to incorporate gender aspects. Most recently, at Hamburg 2016, participating states were encouraged to use the OSCE platform and working bodies to address migration-related issues and improve dialogue on migration-related matters to develop effective measures and common approaches. ODIHR has been continuing its long-standing work to provide assistance to participating states on these issues, undertaking capacity building, awareness raising, and policy research. Among the crucial questions for discussion this afternoon are: have OSCE participating states made progress on facilitating travel as per their commitments back in Helsinki in 1975? Are participating states aware of how entry and exit procedures impact men, women, and children differently? What kind of migrant integration measures and requirements are most commonly used by the OSCE participating states? And what can be considered good and transferable practices? And perhaps most pertinent, has the ongoing migration and refugee crisis changed the methods and tools used by OSCE participating states for migrant integration and protection of migrant rights? And what lessons can be learned at this stage? I am very happy and honored to be able to introduce our speaker for this afternoon's session, Ms. Olga Paololungi, the Director of the Bureau for Migration and Asylum at the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Republic of Moldova since 2012. She has over 20 years of experience working for the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, the Constitutional Court, and the Academy of Sciences of the Republic of Moldova. Ms. Paololungi also worked as the coordinator of programs on population and development at UNDP Moldova, and is also an attorney and a scientific researcher. For a long time, she has been engaged in research in the fields of demography, migration, and integrated approaches to human resource management. She is the author and drafter of a number of laws and policies in the field of migration and asylum, including in particular such issues as ensuring the rights of migrants and their families and on stateless persons. The speakers list is still open if anybody would like to sign up. And I would like to remind that speakers can only take the floor in the capacity in which they are registered, and only entities registered on the speakers list can be represented. I would also kindly remind you that we ask participants to submit their statements before the session to the interpreters, and preferably to documents distribution, to ensure the flow of documents reflect the discussion. Statements should be provided to the documentation desk in front of the plenary hall. I also have the happy task of inviting participants to the Chairmanships closing party from Helsinki 75 to Paris 90, which will take place tonight at 8 o'clock in the evening at the Theater Capitol Club. Participants can collect their invitations from delegations' pigeonholes and tables with publications. With no more ado, I would like to hand the floor to Ms. Paolo Lungi for her introductory presentation. Thank you.
Спасибо, Кристин.
Thank you, Christine. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the global phenomenon of migration but gives rise both to serious challenges and to many opportunities for the contemporary world. In my presentation, I'd like to draw attention to the following phenomena and tendencies: of freedom of movement of migrant workers as a basic right, the issue of social integration of legal migrants, and the need for effective legislation and policies when it comes to integrating legal migrants. Now, freedom of movement covers a whole series of issues pertaining to freedom of movement of individuals within the borders of their own state, moving to foreign countries, and also freedom of movement of foreigners within foreign countries. Now, we have gone beyond the previous framework of migration within regions. This occurred within economic unions of states and not among them. Now, while within the framework of regional economic communities, there have been negotiations to introduce formal regimes ensuring freedom of movement, the intensification of migration processes among regions requires more study and a new approach. The given tendency reflects the situation arising in the world when the basis of integration and development is freedom of movement, that is to say, freedom of movement of capital, of goods, services, technologies, and the labor force. Freedom of movement within regional economic associations and beyond such communities contributes to transfer of knowledge, of know-how, of human potential, and of labor resources where they are required to stimulate investment and economic development. Now, the commitments concerning transnational contact among individuals and freedom of movement as a whole can be found in many OSCE documents. For instance, in the final Act on Cooperation and Security in Europe of 1975 in Helsinki, participating states committed themselves to supporting more opportunities for their citizens to travel for personal and professional reasons. In adopting these documents, the OSCE participating states supported mutually advantageous measures to specify the rights and to simplify the procedures in order that individuals be able to move from one state to another on a temporary or permanent basis, and in particular for humanitarian purposes. However, this also supported contacts in other areas like business, education, and science. It is worth stressing that with a view to ensuring the commitments taken within the OSCE, many participating states have also developed a legal and standard-setting basis for the registration of their population in the places where they live, putting in place systems of population registration that would ensure a balance between the right to freedom of movement and the right to choose one's place of residence. It is quite important also to look at the approach to improve the visa policy of participating states in accordance with OSCE commitments in the field of freedom of movement and contacts among individuals. A more flexible approach, simplification or changes in the procedure to receive an invitation in order to get a visa or to leave the country, a reduction in consular fees, and specification of what the category of foreigners mean, a broader approach to the use of contemporary technologies, and so on, have contributed a more movement of migrants on a legal basis, and also ensured the rights and the obligations of legal migrants, their social integration, and the possibility to reunify families. We must also look at the changes in the legislative and institutional spheres that have been implemented by countries like Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia when implementing a whole series of measures that give rights to their citizens to enter countries of the EU on a visa-free basis. But it must be recalled that migration is not a utilitarian aspect of demography and economics. It is something that relates to individuals, to the individual person. In the globalizing world, the main role in regulating migration is the legality of the stay of migrants on the territory of other countries, the protection of their rights, and their integration in countries of residence or reintegration when they return to the country of origin. Now, unlike the presence of many formalized procedures for people leaving many regions, at the present time within the OSCE participating states, we don't have a single legal document that would provide a clear definition of the concept of integration of the physical person or groups of persons. When working on national policies in this field, international and regional documents are invoked, guaranteeing the basic rights of migrants and their status of residence in a country. And a number of OSCE participating states also take advantage of the immigration legislative base of the EU, the law of the European Community on Freedom of Movement of Physical Persons, relating in particular to the right to work. And also standards of EU association agreements with third countries are also invoked. It should be noted that OSCE participating states, given the international documents that have been adopted in the area of protecting rights of migrants and members of their families, have taken on long-term commitments to guarantee to migrants that their rights and freedoms will be guaranteed independently of where they live. The protection of migrants from any form of discrimination, intolerance, or xenophobia, ensuring effectiveness of integration processes of migrants who legally reside in the receiving state, and simplifying their participation in the integration process. It is particularly important in the overall approach to resolving the issue of integration of migrants is the development and improvement at the national level, with the participation of migrants, of integration strategies and programs, and ensuring national policies in international relations that would take into consideration gender specificities as well. And at the present time, there's a whole series of different national policies in OSCE participating states. Each state determines its own integration policy as a function of its economic and social potential, the presence or absence of institutions that implement or coordinate integration processes, the extent of involvement of the civil society, and the activity and interests of migrants themselves. And the diversity of these approaches means that there's a whole series of measures that are used depending on the category of migrant and the period of stay in the receiving country. What is most important for integration is knowledge of the language or the presence of other possibilities for social or cultural integration, and also regulation of the issue of employment of migrants and members of their families. States are adopting different approaches for the implementation of these measures, such as voluntary or obligatory knowledge studying of the language, and in planning measures, various criteria are taken into consideration. The individual possibility of the migrant, the level of education, the extent to which the migrant is vulnerable. There can be different categories that are more or less vulnerable depending on the age, the level of education, possible disabilities, the structure or institute that is responsible for implementing these measures, the possibility of applying individual modern approaches, and allowing for part of the expense of these measures to be covered by the state, some by the individual, and there can be other measures as well. Another important measure for effective integration of migrations is their employment. Doing away with obstacles to employment is important, and experience has shown that even in the presence of a financial crisis and a restriction in the job market in receiving countries, it can be effective to implement such measures as teaching the local language, providing procedures for granting diplomas and qualifications or recognizing them when they have been obtained elsewhere, and also training and retraining, and especially vocational training. The presence of the legislative and enforcement practice sometimes limits the integration of migrants through their difficulties on the job market. Now, it should be stressed that the linguistic, sociocultural, and employment integration of migrants is hostage to ensuring such basic rights as access to education, healthcare services, social security, and so on. The overall approach to the issue of integration of migrations in the receiving society contributes to their harmonious development and the assurance of their basic rights and freedoms. The present migration crisis has shown that there are a number of challenges. In particular, in some OECD participating states, specific criteria and limitations have been introduced when it comes to receiving migrants and their family members. However, this should not result in limiting the methods and measures used by countries to defend the rights of migrants and their integration in the receiving society. It should be admitted that the issue of integration of migrants at the present time is one of the most serious challenges for contemporary policies of migration control in many OSCE countries. And if this is resolved in a high-quality way, both the migrants and the receiving state can win from this. So I believe that this discussion is particularly important, and I'll be pleased to hear out what delegates have to say on the issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Paola Lungi. I think that was a very interesting presentation, which really helped to set the scene for our discussions this afternoon. I think that they're very valuable perspectives, particularly from the experiences of Moldova, which is a participating state that has experienced migration first in one and certainly now in the other direction. And I think that the 2 points which really stood out for me from Ms. Paola Lungi's presentation were that we are talking about individuals here, and it's important to recognize that when looking at policies and actions to address integration. And secondly, also the breadth of issues and areas that are involved in successful migrant integration work, which is sort of determined by a great deal of coordination work across different areas and elements of government. So I would now like to open to the floor, and we have a number of speakers. The speakers list is still open. And we are also doing fairly well in terms of the number of speakers. So we have a more generous 5 minutes to allow. I would firstly like to invite Estonia on behalf of the EU, followed by the Fund for Legal Support and Protection of Compatriots' Rights Abroad. Estonia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam. Moderator. I'm honored to speak on behalf of the European Union and of the following countries that align themselves to this statement: the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Norway, Ukraine, Moldova, Armenia, Georgia. And excuse my tone of voice, I've had a sore throat. Freedom of movement is a fundamental human right and one of the central values of the European Union. It represents one of the 4 fundamental freedoms enshrined and protected in the EU treaties. EU citizens consider freedom of movement as the most notable achievement of European integration. A lot of progress has been made to facilitate freedom of movement in OSCE area. However, in a number of participating states, human rights defenders, including humanitarian organizations, continue to face undue restrictions with regard to free movement. It is crucial that participating states recognize the importance of human rights work and fully comply with the commitments and relevant international standards concerning freedom of movement, preventing the access of human rights defenders to any part of a state's territory, especially the conflict areas, or to any relevant site for the purpose of monitoring, reporting, and other human rights activities is not acceptable. Madam Moderator, the European Union has paid increased attention to a well-managed legal migration, recognizing the integration of migrant workers and legal migrants as a growth opportunity both for the countries of origin and for the countries of destination of migratory flows. A forward-looking and comprehensive European immigration policy is an important objective for the European Union, intended to establish a balanced approach to dealing with regular and irregular immigration. The partnership framework with third countries under the European Agenda on Migration is offering the platform to implement this policy in close cooperation with our partners, finding shared solutions and establishing sound and fair dialogues. The European Union encourages the creation of conditions to foster greater harmony in relations between migrant workers and the rest of the society in which they lawfully reside. The European Union reaffirms the principles stated in the European Agenda for the Integration of Third Country Nationals. The European Union believes that successful integration policy includes integration through participation, more involvement at local level, as well as involvement of countries of origin. That is why active participation of migrants in the labor market, to the sociocultural life and the decision-making process through a genuine bottom-up approach and by reinforcing interinstitutional cooperation among different levels of governance is essential. In conclusion, the European Union would like to make the following recommendations. The OSCE participating states should ensure the right to freedom of movement and residence within their borders, as well as the right to leave the country, including its own, and return to his or her country. Security-related restrictions should be proportional and in response to a specific public need. The OSCE participating states should ensure freedom of movement of human rights defenders, enabling them to pursue their human rights activities. The OSCE participating states should focus on building dialogue and cooperation as an essential prerequisite to ensuring safe and sustainable human mobility in full respect of human rights. The OSCE participating states should contribute in a coherent way towards the integration of the regular migrant population, fully respecting their human rights and fundamental freedoms. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And perhaps before we move to the next speaker, if I could just remind participants that when first speaking, we would be grateful if you could introduce yourself, your name and your organization, delegation or institution that you represent. So next we have the Fund for Legal Support and Protection of Compatriots' Rights Abroad, followed by Uzbekistan. So the Fund, you have the floor.
Уважаемые господа,
Thank you very much. The non-governmental organization Fund for the Legal Support and Protection of Compatriots' Rights Abroad, which I am the president of, was founded in the Russian Federation and serves to promote the interests of Russian-speaking minorities in 50 countries of the world. In the OSCE, this is the largest number of ethnic national minority. Over 5 years, we have helped 60,000 representatives of the Russian-speaking community, and most of those are from countries inside the OSCE. And in the vast majority of those countries, our work is met with good understanding. However, in some cases, it meets with resistance and indeed some persecution in countries. The 7th of October 2016 decree from Ukraine left the fund on the list of organizations which represented a threat to international interests, security, etc. And that, while the fund respects the standards of international law and does not carry out any activities on the territory of Ukraine. The only explanation can be that the authorities do not like the concern that the fund feels with regard to the actions taken towards the Russian-speaking population in the country and the measures taken which violate the fundamental standards of the UN and the OSCE with regard to the national minorities living there. But concern, unlike actions, cannot be considered illegal under international law and cannot be the object of prosecution. The inalienable right of individuals have the right is to maintain without any discrimination free and peaceful contact with other members of their group and with persons belonging to other minorities, as well as contacts across frontiers with citizens of other states to whom they are related by national, ethnic, or religious or linguistic ties. And this is something that the UN Declaration refers to, the documents of the OSCE, etc. However, recently, the authorities of Latvia and Latvia have not allowed individuals who had valid visas to participate in the activities of the Russian-speaking minority. The representatives of the fund were forbidden from entering the territory to participate. There have been no grounds given for the refusal of entry. So we're finding ourselves in a situation where people living in countries with a Russian-speaking minority are being portrayed as a threat to national security with egregious consequences. The special security services in the Baltic countries, including Estonia, see the acts of the Russian-speaking minorities as being damaging for the country. They portray them as opponents of the state, identifying individuals in the leadership of organizations such as mine and the representing national minorities as being of moral danger to the country. The media often presents the interpretation of the law enforcement and security agencies. For example, according to the security services agencies, they will say before giving their viewpoint, or say the security forces reported, or the pro-Russian demonstration counterintelligence officers were observed. And this is something that you can easily see if you look at the website www.15minutes.it and many other sources, such as ReBaltica. What we are talking about here are legally registered NGOs, so it's a clear violation of all international standards in the area of human rights. Our fund is carrying out genuine activities to practically implement the principles of OSCE to protect the rights of national minorities. Preventing this activity for political and emotional reasons, as we see it, is not constructive, and nor does it fit with the political commitments that the participating states of the OSCE have taken upon themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we have the delegation of Uzbekistan, followed by Serbia. Uzbekistan, the floor is yours.
Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, Anurada Mahimova, I represent the Prosecutor General of Uzbekistan. In the present world, the issue of migration is a growing phenomenon. The flows are larger and larger, both internally and among states, and the conceptual basis for a good migration policy is particularly important. There must be a good legal basis. This is important to restrict illegal migration, but also to ensure national security and the rights of legal migrants. I would like briefly to concentrate on some of the main aspects of ongoing reform in Uzbekistan concerning migration policy. At the beginning of 2017, on the initiative of the President, a strategic action plan was adopted for the period through to 2021. This action strategy includes further development of social security with a view to increasing employment and the real remuneration of individuals and ensuring more social security and health care. There will work be completed by the end of this year on a law on legal migration, which will make it possible for internal and external labor migration to be regulated in an appropriate way. Many Uzbeks work outside the borders of the country, and the action of foreigners in Uzbekistan needs to be properly regulated as well. And then there's the issue of our adherence to the IOM, the International Office of Migration. For Uzbeks who work abroad, there is a special government service site which guarantees Uzbekistan citizens who have left to study or to live abroad, and this provides them with consular services. They can obtain various forms of documentation. Now, in order to ensure the security of compatriots, we seek to make sure that Uzbek citizens who have left the country to work as legal migrants are well protected. In particular, in March of this year, we signed a cooperation agreement with 9 Polish companies that work in the construction, textile, agricultural, and food processing sectors. We have signed agreements with 2 foreign governments concerning the possibility for Uzbekistan citizens to work on a temporary basis in Russian Federation and elsewhere. We have also been in touch with a Japanese delegation with a view to opening a center for the training of Uzbekistan citizens who are planning to go to Japan to work there. We have similar contacts with Turkey and Kazakhstan. Their negotiations are underway to come up with memoranda on exchange of labor resources between our country and those countries. That's true also of the Sultanate of Amman. On 5 July, in the presence of our minister and a number of Uzbekistan institutions and regional representatives, there has been direct dialogue. Our consulates have received a number of complaints concerning problems of citizenship and assistance in difficult living circumstances. One of the big problems concerning citizens is the so-called sticker that is required for traveling abroad. That is a formality that will be done away with as of 2019. And a working group has been set up for direct contact between representatives of the Foreign Ministry and Uzbekistan citizens who live abroad to see how various consular processes and formalities can be simplified. It is important, of course, for these individuals that timely decisions be taken and fully justified in order that their rights and freedoms be guaranteed. Thank you.
So next we have Serbia, followed by the Russian Federation. Serbia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dusan Kozarev, Deputy Director of the Office for Kosovo and Metohija in the Government of the Republic of Serbia. Last year, I pointed out the failure to respect the procedure for enacting the law on the Kosovo Property Comparison and Verification Agency, as neither the representatives of Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija nor the IDPs have participated in it, even though the subject of the law mostly relates to their usurped property. In July this year, Pristina adopted administrative instructions for the implementation of the aforementioned law, regardless of which there still is a serious possibility of legalization of usurped property of IDPs. In addition, on January 30th and February 14th of this year, the Kosovo Privatization Agency reached a decision to liquidate 11 business entities operating in Serbian majority municipalities in northern Kosovo and Metohija, which seriously threatens the economy of this area. Also, the pre-election rhetoric of Albanian politicians was particularly worrying, as it often contained open threats towards the Serbian community and its interest in Kosovo and Metohija. It is therefore not surprising that since the previous meeting of the Human Dimension, there were over 80 ethnically motivated attacks on Serbs, and in February 2017, an anti-Serbian graffiti, Kill All Serbs, arose in the vicinity of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Gnjilane, a city from which 8,000 Serbs were expelled, and only 20 of them live in today. Last year, here in Warsaw, I drew attention to the existence of an organized group in the region of Page, whose aim is to prevent the return by placing information on raising alleged war crimes indictments against Serbs, usually IDPs who applied for the return. We just had such a case on August 28. Bogdan Mitrovic was arrested while traveling by bus to Suva Reka with his family and a large number of returnees from Serbia proper to visit his house in Mušotište and the Church of the Holy Mother of God from 1315, which was demolished in March 2004, violence against Serbs, their property, and sanctities. He was accused of alleged war crimes by his first neighbor, who was the first to burn and destroy his house and then usurp his land. And what makes the irony worse, it is the same man who is in charge of the return of Serbs in the municipality of Suva Reka. Bogdan Mitrovic is a member of the working group for the return of displaced persons and interethnic dialogue with the Albanians in the municipality of Suva Reka, and since he fled Kosovo and Metohija in 1999, he was coming to his place of origin each year, but the indictment has been magically raised against him 18 years after the end of conflict. By doing this, the judiciary in Kosovo and Metohija joined the campaign of intimidation of Serbian people and once again confirmed that it is not ready to give justice independently. All of this indicates an elaborate model for undermining personal and collective rights of Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija, according to which the indictments for alleged war crimes are not an instrument for abstracting the freedom of movement, the return of IDPs, and an institutionalized support for the usurpers of Serbian property. In addition to this event, on the night between September 13th and 14th, employees of the Red Cross of Serbia were taken into custody and the documentation on socially vulnerable families was confiscated by the Kosovo police, which represents shameless abuse of humanitarian issues for political purposes. All of the above demonstrates the necessity of strengthening the international role in Kosovo and Metohija, including the ULEX mandate. The provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina are not responsible and mature enough to apply for UNESCO membership, and especially due to the demonstrated political instrumentalization of the Kosovo police, the so-called Kosovo should not be admitted to Interpol at the upcoming General Assembly of this organization in Beijing. You can find the full version in documentation part in electronic form, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So next we have the Russian Federation, followed by the United States of America. The Russian Federation, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Moderator. The situation in the OSCE in terms of protecting the right of freedom of movement and protecting citizens of other countries is becoming alarming. A whole category of people are denied the right of movement on account of their opinion or because of the part of the world they find themselves in. Europe is following US's example by implying the introduction of different kinds of black lists of undesirable people. There is an attempt here to deal with dissenting views. A major concern is the decisions of the Baltic countries to stop the entry or deport a number of individuals, political scientists, journalists, for expressing an opinion which is opposite to the official one. Those who have been considered dangerous people include artists who have simply expressed agreement with their country's policies. We have pointed to the discrimination that has taken place in the application of limitations on the freedom of movement of Crimea, including the failure to grant visas or recognize passports given by Russia in this area. This is an intentional collective punishment and a denial of the right to self-determination. The recommendation on the non-recognition of Crimean passports issued by the European Commission last June violates the right of Crimeans to make their own choice and undermines Europe's position as a protector of human rights. A growing concern is the practice of forced abductions on the territory of the OSCE. Long, arbitrary, and often secret detention of citizens has become systematic in Ukraine. Citizens who are illegally detained by the security services in Ukraine are subject to torture, inhumane and denigrating treatment. Often they are deprived of contact with their family and access to medicine and legal support. This is something which can be found in the reports of Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. This Ukrainian practice is echoed by the illegitimate detention by the American Special Service of foreigners abroad, which has fully affected Russians as well. The number of individuals subject to this from Russia has reached over 20 last year. The migration system has led to need to consider the rights of migrants because of the racism, the attitude towards migrants and refugees, xenophobia, etc. Here, we need to tap the potential of the ODIHR and the three representatives of the chairmanship on tolerance. We need to recognize as well or understand the terrorist threat from migrants coming from areas of armed conflict and the need to try and stop them. Another major problem is trafficking in humans, the victims of which are migrants, especially women and children. The organization has a large experience and instruments in this area, and we welcome the initiatives taken in this area by the Special Representative of Trafficking in Humans, Ms. Jarbusinova. Help in integrating refugees and migrants, including worker migrants, in the host society is essential. At the same time, migrants need to respect the traditions that they find in their new country. The structures of the OSCE can be helpful in educating migrants, and a role here can be played by interreligious dialogue. We have not to forget that the integrational efforts taken by the welcoming country to integrate migrants should not be seen as assimilating those who wish to make their future in a new home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So next we have the United States of America, followed by Human Rights Vision. The United States, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. OSCE participating states have committed themselves in the Vienna concluding document to respect fully the right of everyone to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state and to leave any country, including his own, and return to his country. Nevertheless, restrictions on both internal and external travel continue in some states. In Turkmenistan, the government bars select persons from leaving the country. Relatives of imprisoned or exiled critics of the government often find out that they are barred from traveling abroad when they are turned back at the airport. Russia's ongoing aggression restricts movement in conflict areas of Ukraine. We call on the forces Russia trains, arms, and fights alongside to fulfill their commitment to opening a vehicle crossing point in Luhansk in order to ease passage across the line of contact. In accordance with the mandate of the SMM, monitors are to have unrestricted access throughout Ukraine. We call on Russia to end the attacks and other forms of intimidation against the monitors and to facilitate safe access for the SMM throughout Ukraine, including along its internationally recognized border with Russia. We again call on Russia to grant access for the SMM to Crimea, which remains a part of Ukraine. Due to Russia's occupation, Ukrainians moving between Crimea and the rest of Ukraine also face long crossings. Crimean Tatars often report intrusive inspections, harassment, and detentions at administrative boundary. Russian occupation authorities ban Crimean Tatar leaders from returning to their homeland. In Georgia, the closure of crossing points along the so-called administrative boundary line of the Russian-occupied territory of Abkhazia further restricts local residents' movement. The United States fully supports Georgia's territorial integrity, independence, and sovereignty within its internationally recognized border. We call for these crossing points to be reopened. In Azerbaijan, authorities prevented journalists, activists, opposition politicians, and human rights lawyers from traveling outside the country. The government often places travel restrictions on their families. In Uzbekistan, the decree abolishing exit visas by January 1, 2019 is welcome, and we look forward to more progress. With respect to migrant workers in Russia, we are concerned about reports of migrant workers building sites and infrastructure for the 2018 World Cup. The projects have attracted thousands of workers from throughout Russia and the former Soviet republics. Many have experienced severe labor rights abuses, including unpaid or withheld wages and outdoor work in unsafe temperatures, as well as retaliation or threats of retaliation for raising concerns. We are also concerned about attacks against and harassment of Central Asian migrants working in Russia. And with that, I would conclude my statement, and thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. So next we have Human Rights Vision, followed by Amnesty International. Human Rights Vision, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Victoria Nadirtina. I represent the Organization on Human Rights Protection, Human Rights Vision. There is complete arbitrariness in the sphere of the right to free movement in Tajikistan. All people who are disliked by the Tajik authorities, as well as members of their families, are detained at the border and are not allowed to leave the country for unreasonable illegal reasons. All these illegal actions by law enforcement agencies were first directed against members and leaders of opposition parties. Then the following years began to be used against dissenting human rights defenders, lawyers, journalists who criticize the activities of the authorities. On March 8, 2017, the sister of the opposition activist Sharafuddin Gadoev, Hafizamo Gadoeva, who intended to leave the country for Moscow with her children, was removed from the flight because of her brother's political activities. On May 14, Faiznisa Vahidova, known for her advocacy activities, was detained at the Tajik border by officers of the State Committee for National Security of Tajikistan when she was traveling to Kyrgyzstan. She was detained for 8 hours, first claiming that she had a defect in her passport and that she didn't have the right to leave the country, but then informed that she was on the list of non-exit persons. On July 10, 2017, immediately after the Dortmund conference, Tajik national security officers came to home of the family of a lawyer, Jamshed Yorov, and threatened his wife, Dilbar Zuhurova, that neither she nor her children had the right to leave Tajikistan, but for attempting to leave the country, they will face prison. Early in February 2017, Dilbar Zuhurova tried to leave Tajikistan, but she was not allowed to even leave the entrance, stopping her on the porch of the house. Family members of Muhyiddin Kabiri and other members of Islamic Revival Party in Tajikistan are under severe pressure from Tajik state bodies with a complete ban on leaving the country. Every such detention and restriction in movement is accompanied by a lack of legitimate explanations or reasons. Violation of the human right to free movement occurs in the frankest way and is connected with the political or human rights activities of people. In this regard, we call on the Tajik authorities to stop the permanent violation of the human right to free movement and to provide free access to entry and exit to oppositionist human rights defenders and their relatives. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we have Amnesty International, followed by the Legal Information Center for Human Rights. Amnesty International, you have the floor.
Thank you. Madam Moderator, delegates, participants. In August 2017, President Mirziyoyev signed a decree abolishing requirements for nationals of Uzbekistan to obtain permission to travel abroad from 1st January 2019. The use of these so-called exit visas is an old Soviet-era practice that has long ago been abolished elsewhere in the former Soviet Union. The Association for Human Rights in Central Asia, International Partnership for Human Rights, and Amnesty International welcome the authorities' commitment to rescind these restrictive requirements. However, we are concerned that travel restrictions on several individuals who have criticized the government have not been lifted, with sometimes tragic consequences. For example, human rights lawyer Polina Braunerk, who was wheelchair-bound and suffered from serious medical conditions, unsuccessfully requested permission to travel abroad for medical treatment for several years. When she complained to the prosecutor's office about these refusals, the authorities pressured her to withdraw the complaint. In February this year, she was again refused an exit visa. Sadly, Polina Braunerk died in May this year. Murat Jurayev was released from prison in November 2015 after completing a 21-year sentence on politically motivated charges. He is in need of urgent spinal surgery, which he could have in Germany, but has been refused permission to leave the country. In June this year, his wife wrote to the president explaining that his application for permission to travel has been under consideration since April. Jurayev was then told by a local police officer about a Minister of Interior order stating that those previously convicted of serious crimes will only be allowed to travel abroad after 15 years, and not after 1 year as it's stated in legislation. Former opposition journalist Muhammad Bekjanov, who was released in February 2017 after spending 17 years in prison, requires urgent medical treatment for tuberculosis and spinal hernia. Bekjanov has not yet applied for an exit visa to travel abroad for medical treatment. As a local police officer told him, then persons under administrative supervision are not allowed to travel abroad. Bekjanov's wife and children live in the United States, and he has not seen them for 19 years. We urge the Uzbekistani authorities to immediately lift travel restrictions on individuals previously imprisoned on politically motivated grounds, in particular on Murat Jurayev and Muhammad Bekjanov, and ensure that they are allowed to travel abroad for urgent medical treatment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next we have the Legal Information Center for Human Rights, followed by the Council of Europe. The Legal Information Center, the floor is yours. If I can just remind speakers to introduce themselves with their names as well as the organizations or institutions they're affiliated with. Thank you. Legal Information Center.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for giving me the floor. Larisa Semyonova, the Executive Director of the Legal Information Center for Human Rights in Estonia. I would agree with the recommendations of Estonia to representatives of the EU, particularly when it comes to applying the principle of proportionality, ensuring the right of freedom of movement and not using national security as a pretext for limiting that. But there is a problem in Estonia with the presence of black lists. And to what extent is this really in line with the standards of EU law? Now, to guarantee human rights and fundamental freedoms, there should be an objective approach to any prohibitions to enter the territory of a given state without the setting up of black lists. And people who live in conflict territories should also have those rights, especially when in exceptional situations of serious illness or death of a loved one. Now, our organization has already expressed its concern about the presence of blacklists of citizens of other states, in particular EU states, that the authorities of Estonia have set up. At the present time, our organization is dealing with 2 cases out of 4 that are connected with limitations on the right to freedom of movement. In all of these cases, Estonian authorities prohibited entry into the territory on the basis of public expression of views about things occurring in Estonia and other countries of the Baltic. So the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the security police consider that the individuals in question are a threat to the security of the state. In one of the 4 cases, the judicial proceedings lasted more than a year, and the problem was resolved in favor of the citizen of Latvia, Professor Viktor Gushchin, since the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the security police did not provide any evidence that there was a basis for a prohibition to enter Estonia. And the Estonian court came down on the right side. In the other 3 cases, there has not been any success in the Estonian courts. In the case of the citizen of Latvia, the journalist Andrea Yakovlea, there is an appeal proceeding that is underway. In 2 other cases, the complaints have been lodged with the European Court of Human Rights. Now, the changes in the law in Estonia are extending the list of criteria on the basis of which entry into Estonia can be prohibited. It is enough now to simply indicate suspicion of, and not just a fact. And the authorities are also not obligated to justify their decision. And there are Russians who have lost the right to freedom of movement because of that. And there's a particular problem now for individuals who live in Crimea, who are, because of their present situation, are not able to obtain Schengen visas, neither in Kiev nor in Russia. And there are no exceptions allowed, even if there is a serious illness or death of a close relative. Thank you.
So next we have the Council of Europe, followed by the Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety. The Council of Europe, you have the floor.
Thank you, moderator. I would like to refer you to our contributions on the website on, firstly, migrant workers as guaranteed by the European Social Charter, and secondly, our contribution on the Intercultural Cities Programme. In the European Social Charter, migrant workers are specifically guaranteed a number of rights. These provisions foresee in particular the right to equal treatment regarding pay, membership of trade unions and housing, taxes and legal proceedings, the right to family reunion and to transfer earnings and savings, safeguards against expulsion, and provision for training in the national language and teaching of the mother tongue to the migrants' children. Turning to the Intercultural Cities Programme, this is a programme which is implemented by the Council of Europe, which supports local authorities across Europe and beyond. The aim of which is to design inclusive integration policies and strategies built on the application of a diversity management model based on the concept that a society's diversity gives it a competitive advantage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next we have the Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety, followed by the Islamic Renaissance Party. So the Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak in Russian. Ladies and gentlemen, in Azerbaijan today, there is an alarming problem of freedom of movement and its limitation for political reasons. And what I'm going to try and focus on are the most visible and substantial problems in this area. leading human rights defenders, politicians, and others are living under a travel ban. One politician was not able to receive a passport because there were accusations hanging over him for a very long period of time. So during that time, he couldn't travel. The same problem, my brother, Mahman Gusenov, who's a human rights defender and journalist, in 2012, he was subject to a travel ban from Azerbaijan, and ultimately he was arrested and detained. Today, journalists and human rights defenders who have been recognized by international organizations and have come out of prison are still not able to leave the country, which is a severe limitation on their rights and the rights of and millions of people are having their rights limited. It impacts on, for example, their profession, their ability to do their job. Hadijis Mailu, who is a human rights defender, Intikam Eleva, who's a journalist of radio freedom and an online journalist, have been subjected to similar measures. OSCE countries need to adopt equivalent measures to officials who are violating individuals' rights to travel. We call on the OSCE and the Council of Europe and the US to limit visas for the people who are carrying out these acts and members of their family. For years on end, human rights defenders are not allowed to leave the country. They are detained, and the family members of the ruling class of the country are given rights to travel and live abroad. Today, human rights defenders are not just being persecuted in my country. If they go to other countries, they are still subject to harassment by the state. Ahmad Mukhtarleh, who's a journalist who was doing his job in Tbilisi, was abducted, taken to Azerbaijan, subjected to torture, and this individual, despite calls from European society, is still in prison. We'd call on Georgia and other countries to apply the principles that they have committed themselves to in this case. The European Parliament has taken a clear position on this. Other countries have expressed their outrage with this state of affairs and violence being used against a journalist on the territory of a third country. With regard to my own situation, I've had to carry out my human rights activities from another country because my brother, members of my team, are also being mistreated in the country. I was stripped of my citizenship when I had to leave the country for political reasons. The decision was taken by President Malieva in violation of the constitution and the conventions which Azerbaijan has signed up to. All countries need to adopt a clear position of disagreement with such acts. We need to stop them spreading to countries such as Ukraine. If we don't do something now, it will spread to other countries. I've been stripped of my citizenship, and I'm trying to continue my work, but with the support of the OSCE and recommendations and mechanisms, people like me will be able to continue working both within the country and beyond it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. I see that we have somebody filming, so I would like to just take the opportunity to remind participants that live streaming of the 2017 HDIM is available, and filming with cameras and video cameras and phones is only permitted by accredited journalists. No other audiovisual recordings should be undertaken without the explicit permission of the individuals being filmed. Thank you. So next we have the Islamic Renaissance Party, followed by the Anti-Discrimination Center Memorial. The Islamic Renaissance Party, you have the floor.
Yeah, Sadruddin.
My name is Sadruddin of Mararibov, and I'm from the Islamic Renaissance Party in Tajikistan. I welcome you, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates. Over the last few years, several thousand citizens of Tajikistan have appealed to various EU countries with applications for refugees. The number of Tajiks who have been forced to leave their homeland increased greatly after the events of September 2015. The attempted coup d'etat was a pretext for closing down the only Islamic party in Central Asia, the Islamic Party of Tajikistan, and labeling it a terrorist group. After these events, the forces of law and order, the Tajik authorities, have increased their pressure on all political opponents, subjecting them to repression, arrests in their homeland. And this pressure is exerted not only on members of the party, but also members of their families. There are interrogations, constant control by the special services, removal of property, prohibitions to leave the country, to receive a foreign passport, and all of this is having a huge negative impact on these individuals that has forced many of them to leave their homeland, and sometimes they are leaving simply to save their lives. The Tajik authorities consider many of those who have left the country to be extremists, and many of them are labeled officially as extremists. Now, according to official data, more than 1,000 citizens of Tajikistan who have left the country, who have fled the country, are on the wanted list of Interpol on charges of terrorism and extremism. Over the last 2 months, more than a dozen Tajikistan families have ended up in Belarus, sometimes for 1 month, sometimes have been there for 2 months, and they keep going to the Polish border and asking for refugee status, including my family, including my father, the 70-year-old Sadruddinov Kalandar, one of the 5 founders of the Islamic Renaissance Party that was a victim of these events. And pressure has been put on him by the authorities and the forces of law and order, but with some difficulty he did manage to leave his country, and he now finds himself in critical circumstances in Brest, and is unable to cross the border of Poland. For completely unjustified and unfounded and unannounced reasons, he's not allowed to cross the border. Now, back in 1985, at the time of the Soviet Union, my father spoke out against the war in Afghanistan, and he stated that Tajikistan soldiers should no longer be sent to participate in this war. He criticized it. He wrote various articles about freedom of expression, about torture that was practiced within the system at the time, and for those reasons he was detained and arrested. But the intervention of various organizations such as Human Rights Watch and other European human rights defense organization at those times, I mean, in their archives, they can go back and look up Sadruddinov Kalandar. He ended up spending 2 months in prison, and then he was given 2 years suspended. And today he went to Brest yet again, and the Polish border guards did not receive him. They turned him away, and in fact, He has attempted to apply for refugee status on 21 occasions, and each time he is being turned away. This is someone who is more than 70 years old and who has fought politically in favor of human rights and democracy for most of his life. And now he finds himself in a very difficult situation. He has spent the last 2 years being tortured, subject to physical and moral pressure, and he's at the very border of the EU. And now there are these political motives that make it impossible for him to become a political refugee, to which which is something that he deserves. If he goes back to Tajikistan, he will be subject to torture by our forces of law and order. So I would appeal to you to take such situations into consideration and to deal with these individuals as they deserve. You must understand what their difficult situation is. I myself, since February of 2016, I managed to leave Tajikistan through Ukraine, Belarus, and finally I managed to get into Poland. And now I've been here for a year and a half, and my application for refugee status is still being examined. I mean, anyone who looks into my past and knows me can see what I've been dealing with, and that this is a status I deserve. So if you have these political migrants or scientists who can fear for their safety or their lives in their own countries, their applications really should be looked at seriously and urgently and on a humane basis. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So next we have the Anti-Discrimination Center Memorial, followed by the international platform Global Rights for Peaceful People. The Anti-Discrimination Center Memorial, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The situation of migrants in post-Soviet countries is characterized by numerous violations of the rights of migrants and members of their families. While Russia is one of the biggest recipients of working migrants, it implements a tough migration policy, which leads to increasing vulnerability of working migrants. Authorities of migrant donors countries do not provide adequate solutions to protect rights of their citizens outside of country. I would like to concentrate especially on places of deprivation of liberty. Firstly, a lot of working migrants end up in detention centers for foreigners in cases of violation of migration rules. In fact, the conditions of such centers, according to decision of European Court of Human Rights, Kim versus Russia, were recognized as inhuman. Pregnant women are quite often put in detention centers that don't have special conditions required by their pregnancy. These practices are rigorous and completely unacceptable. Detention of stateless persons makes even less sense in view of their deportation, as far as they could never be deported. The living conditions in such centers are just like in prisons. Recently, Constitutional Court of Russian Federation recognized that such a detention of stateless people contradicts with Constitution of Russia and basic human rights principles, but the legislation still wasn't changed. We have a number of cases when stateless people and migrants died in detention because of disease, or they just committed suicides. I would like to point out the problem of children, members of families in migration. According to existing practice, migrants' children are separated from their parents because of problems with migration status, kept locked in separate institutions, and sometimes separately deported. Separation of children from parents leads to very high stress for the whole families, but also could end up with death, like it happened in case of Tajik 5-month child Umrali Nazarov, who died in a few hours after separation from his mother during a raid from migration service. Russian authorities never acknowledged neither guilt in death of child nor unlawful separation from mother. There are special closed institutions for children, members of migrants' families, separated from parents, which should play a role of alternative detention, but in fact still it's deprivation of liberty. Unfortunately, there is lack of appropriate regulations of such centers. For example, children sometimes are not given back to their parents, working migrants, only because living conditions are formally said not to be satisfactory. Meanwhile, some children don't even attend the school because they are not allowed to go out of such closed institutions, so they have no education there. I would like to highlight also the problem of lack of appropriate international regulations of the procedures of work in such special closed institutions for children in post-Soviet Union, in post-Soviet countries. Existing international agreements, including the only one, almost the only one, the Chisinau Agreement, are not adequate to the reality and should be reconsidered. The work of special closed institutions is very specific in every country, and it includes different departments and institutions. Their coordination between all institutions in such countries is needed, as well as regulations of work inside of the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next we have the International Platform, Global Rights for Peaceful People, followed by Georgia. The International Platform, the floor is yours.
Moderator, experts, I'm the president of the International Platform, Global Rights for Peaceful People, repeatedly raising the question on the actions of the ODIHR and the OSCE to protect the rights we're talking about. We repeatedly see rights of movement being violated, preventing return to one's home country if one has carried out fair criticism. In Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, there are people who, speaking at ODIHR, then were given Vitaly Panamayov, for example, is a human rights defender who has been subject to a travel ban. Many of them are detained following speaking at ODIHR. So some of them have been forced to leave the country, some of them going to Netherlands, for example, some to Switzerland. In all of these cases, there are difficulties returning home for weddings, funerals, this kind of thing. So I think we need specialized people in ODIHR to monitor the consequences for human rights defenders and recognize the acts of provocation of the authorities in responding to justified criticism. We call on all of the countries I've mentioned to support my proposal and make the following recommendations. We, representatives of various NGOs, fully supporting all of the OSCE documents and being supporters of international treaties adopted by countries after 1945 and by the former countries of the USSR in 1992, and taking into account the Helsinki Final Act and the Copenhagen document of 1990, as well as the Paris Charter for the right of movement, we request that ODIHR monitor the freedom of movement of civil activists who speak at ODIHR events and resolve any conflicts relating to the civil position that they adopt. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Next we have Georgia, followed by an independent civil society activist, Ms. Shobnom Kudoydodova. Firstly, Georgia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Georgia aligns itself with the statement delivered by Estonia on behalf of the EU. In addition, I would like to make following national statement. The situation in the occupied territories of Georgia remains grave and is characterized by violations of range of rights, especially restrictions on freedom of movement undermine individuals' basic human rights and standard of living on the ground. Russian occupation and associated measures restrict freedom of movement and has significant negative impact on the residents living on both sides of the occupation line. Annually, in occupied Abkhazia, at least around 2,000 people are being illegally detained by the Russian occupational forces for so-called illegal border crossing reasons. The illegally detained people residing on the territory controlled by Georgian central government are either forced to pay so-called fines, which actually is a significant amount of money for the locals, or they are imprisoned. For instance, on April 5th, 2017, father and son Rogavas, residents of village Rike, Zugdidi municipality, were illegally detained by the Russian FSB while fishing in the river Enguri and were sentenced to 2 and 2.5 years of imprisonment, respectively. It's also noteworthy that while the mentioned people are kept in so-called prison, Mr. Rashid Ganjiogli, the brutal murderer of Georgian citizen Mr. Gigaut Khozoria, has never spent a single day in custody. Despite the fact that Georgian central government has perpetrators identifying video evidence recorded by the CCTV camera from the crime scene, de facto Abkhazian authorities let the criminal with impunity. In regard with occupied Skhin Valley region, the illegal detention cases for the so-called illegal border crossing reasons are comparatively less than in occupied Abkhazian region. During the last several years, the annual number of illegally detained persons have been varied from 100 to 180. Currently, 3 persons are illegally imprisoned in occupied Skhin Valley region. One of them is Georgi Giunashvili. On June 8th, 2006, was illegally detained by FSB officers for so-called illegal border crossing reason, and later sentenced to 20 years of imprisonment for the alleged crimes which were totally ungrounded and tailor-made. It's noteworthy that on February 22nd, 2017, the de facto general prosecutor, Mr. Uruzmak Jagayev, in one of his interviews stated that they had detained a war criminal and sentenced him 20 years of imprisonment. In our view, above-mentioned statement is a clear proof that the tailor-made case of Mr. Giunashvili is groundless, highly politicized, and has been directly aimed to blackmail Georgian central government. Also, on June 2017, the de facto Skhin Valley authorities and Russian FSB representatives launched another phase of borderization process. The occupational forces started to create the so-called anti-fire dividing lines along the ABL, which itself is a continuation of the borderization process and a key element in restriction of freedom of movement on the ground. Another most vivid example of restriction of freedom of movement across the occupation line is the decision made by de facto Abkhaz authorities to shut down the so-called crossing points on Enguri River. In 2016, 2 functional crossing points were abolished, and later in 2017, the same happened with other 2 channels of communication, leaving the Enguri Bridge as the only one remaining crossing point connecting Georgian central government-controlled area with the occupied Abkhazia region. We believe that the above-mentioned decision was orchestrated by the Russian Federation and was targeted on full restriction of the free movement between the 2 communities. All in all, on May 20th, as a result of newly established restrictive measures, Mr. Otar Patsuria, the resident of occupied village Meorotobaya, while trying to cross the ABL through the Enguri, as he physically could not reach Enguri crossing point in order to receive his pension, in Zugdidi district drowned in the Enguri River. Also, one of the main elements of the restriction to freedom of movement for the ethnic Georgian living in the occupied Gali district was the so-called residence permit enactment by the de facto Abkhazian authorities. According to the new de facto regulations, locals without the up-mentioned document in Gali district are not allowed to freely move neither outside of Gali district nor cross the ABL. Since 2016, also school children living in the southern part of the occupied Gali district have been negatively affected by the closure of the checkpoints. Overall, it's obvious that freedom of movement remains an extremely problematic issue for the residents on both sides of the occupation line. The provided facts are extremely worrisome and need the entire international community's attention and support. Georgia calls upon the Russian Federation as a power exercising effective control over the occupied territories of Georgia to stop its aggressive policy, restore respect to Georgia's territorial integrity and sovereignty with its internationally recognized border, and implement the ceasefire agreement of the August 12, 2008. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just before we move to the next speaker on the list, I would just like to highlight that we have another 4 speakers to go. So still plenty of space on the speakers list if any more delegations or any more civil society representatives would like to sign up to make their statements on freedom of movement and migration and migrant rights. Okay, so the next speaker, the independent civil society activist, Ms. Shobnam Kudoydodova, followed by the Delegation of Armenia. Ms. Kudoydodova, the floor is yours.
Благодарю.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm an independent activist fighting for human rights. My name is Shobnam Kudoydova. At the present time, some topical problems of migrants and refugees have remained unresolved. People are migrating from their countries. They are, in fact, forced often to leave their homelands because there is a well-founded suspicion that they will be detained and charged with crimes that they never committed on trumped-up charges. They are, in fact, being chased out of their own countries. They flee to save their lives. And yet, European countries turn them back at the border, don't receive them. They are charged with various things. They don't know where to go. This, despite the fact that there are international agreements on how refugees should be treated. The IOM, the UN, and the OSCE deal with these issues. The way in which refugees, in particular political refugees from the former USSR, are being treated by EU member states is very dubious. Europe says a lot about protecting rights and freedoms, and yet in this particular respect, they violate people's rights. I'm one of the victims of that. I spent 9 months in Belarus, and presently, the leader and founder of the Islamic Renaissance Party of Tajikistan is on the border and hasn't been able to cross it. I went to that border yesterday, and I saw how individual human beings are treated. And I can tell you, I recorded on my smartphone the conversation. I can let you hear how Polish border guards treat people and speak to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next we have the Delegation of Armenia, followed by Ukraine. Armenia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Our special thanks to distinguished introducers. The statements before showed that there is problem of access to conflict areas, and also there is problem of limiting restrictions of traveling abroad. I would like to add another problem, the problem of not allowing, prohibiting access to country crossing the border on the ethnic ground. I would like to stress the key role of the OSCE commitments in the sphere of freedom of movement in facilitating people-to-people contacts, building confidence and trust, and promoting connectivity in the OSCE area. It is an important track to reach our objective of common and indivisible Euro-Atlantic and Eurasian security community. Armenian authorities continue facilitation of visa system for people wishing to travel to our country. Citizens of 47 OSCE participating states are exempt from entry visas to travel to Armenia on unilateral or reciprocal basis. As a landlocked country with 80% of borders in blockade, Armenia is one of the most interested participating states in promoting freedom of movement. Enjoyment of the right of the freedom of movement requires existence of open and secure borders between participating states, on which we have agreed in Ljubljana. We understand that conflicts can have certain security bearing on the implementation of this commitment, but it is absolutely unacceptable when this commitment is violated by participating state, which is not party to the conflict. We regret that we will not be able to discuss this issue here in the absence of this participating state, which left the HDIM. Another pressing issue which we would like to raise is continuous denial of entrance to Azerbaijan for not only Armenian citizens but any persons suspected to be of Armenian origin, regardless their nationality. This is the only such case in the whole OSCE area, when a participating state officially implies discriminatory practices on the basis of ethnicity in the field of freedom of movement. The baseline study on cross-border mobility in the OSCE region, elaborated by ODIHR, has reflected this situation. Certain other participating states raised their strong concern with regard to this illegal practice. Such a policy of preventing any people-to-people contacts deepens the gap between our societies and serves as a major obstacle for resolution of long-standing disputes. There is one case I would like to draw your attention. Mr. Marat Ueldanov, Russian citizen of Armenian origin, continues to remain in detention since already more than a year under pretext of drug churches. Such cases have to do not only with violation of commitments in the freedom of movement, but also clearly indicate the alarming situation in the sphere of tolerance and non-discrimination in Azerbaijan. The Azerbaijan authorities are also attempting to impose illegal restrictions of freedom of movement and prevent access of international organizations, journalists, NGOs, human rights defenders beyond their jurisdiction. A speaker before highlighted some such cases. Madam Moderator, in light of the above, we would like to make the following recommendations. Participating states should comply with their commitment to facilitate free and secure movement of persons through ensuring open and secure borders. Participating states should remove illegal restrictions imposed on freedom of movement of all individuals residing in conflict-affected areas and ensure humanitarian access of international organizations, including OSCE, to those areas. And last, participating states should ensure freedom of movement for representatives of governmental bodies, NGOs, and international actors, including OSCE. Any restrictions on freedom of movement should be in line with international standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So next we have Ukraine, followed by Azerbaijan. Ukraine, the floor is yours.
Спасибо большое, уважаемые господа.
Thank you very much indeed, Moderator. First of all, if you allow me to react to the groundless accusations made by the representative of the Russian Federation and some NGOs about the limitations which are allegedly applied to citizens of Ukraine in Crimea and Sevastopol, an inalienable part of my country. I'd like to ensure everybody that all citizens of Ukraine have a right to freedom of movement, even those who have become victim of mass passportization carried out by the occupying powers against the international standards of the international community recognized by ODIHR and the OSCE for national minorities. With regard to the representative of Russia's allegations about forced abduction in Ukraine, we cannot agree. This is a criminal act which has taken place in the occupied parts of Crimea and Sevastopol and Donetsk and Lugansk. We call on officials in Moscow to stop this practice. Release all those who have been illegitimately detained. Ukraine would would line itself with the statement of the European Union and would say the following. In accordance with the classification of the International Organization for Migration, displaced people also belong to migrants, and for more than 3 years this has been a serious case in Ukraine. More than 4% of the population have moved to the territory controlled by the Ukrainian powers. These individuals had to leave their normal place of residence not because of their own wish, but for security, to save their lives and members of their family. The enforced displacement of a large number of people over a short period of time has posed serious challenges to our government. The local communities have had to face this issue and meet the needs of the displaced people. A lot has been done by the powers in Ukraine to help those individuals facing these short-term difficulties. We've established a database of IDPs which enables us to account for these people, and each year they are given specific financial help so that they can buy the basics. More than or a large amount of money has been spent on this. The assistance to individuals with forms of invalidity is also, or with disabilities rather, is something that we have focused on. And at the same time, my country is, or my state is certainly doing its best at the international level to resolve issues such as arranging work for IDPs and how to respond in a situation of aggression in Donbass and the large number of children who have suffered there. Unfortunately, we have to note, ladies and gentlemen, that all of the international instruments and state decisions cannot give due attention to territories that are not controlled by Ukraine. We have a large problem along the border with Russia, which is not under the control of Ukraine and is being used for the transport of armaments. We need to draw the attention of international organizations to the inability of some observance missions to observe what is going on, particularly from the UN and the OSCE. It's necessary that they be able to carry out their work and that the organizations carry out the necessary measures to be able to observe actions in Crimea and Sevastopol. It's also necessary to train local staff so that they can identify violations of human rights and reflect those in their regular reports. Madam Moderator, I'd like to note that despite the recent data of the UNHCR and figures on IDPs, in accordance with the strategy of the international organizations, it is necessary to further develop things in this area. There's a real need for a comprehensive approach to respond to the challenges we face. And this has to be focused on protecting these people and their human dignity. Particular emphasis, we believe, needs to be placed on those who are particularly vulnerable, those with disabilities, women and children, ethnic minorities. We support the principles of the UN in protecting rights of those in conflict and post-conflict situations, and we believe that the OSCE can be used as a place for a fundamental discussion on working out a comprehensive instrument on those who have been forced to leave their place of residence. We believe that the OSCE can be a significant partner in this process, and we look forward to further discussing this with all participating states and representatives of civil society in order to enhance the possibilities that the OSCE has so that we can face the challenges that internally displaced persons face. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. So next we have Azerbaijan, followed by the human rights movement Bir Dvino Kyrgyzstan. And unless anyone else signs up, that would be it for our speakers list, and we will then move to rights to reply. So Azerbaijan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The fact that there are such intense migration processes is something that is changing the civilizations in the world. I mean, almost all countries are affected. There are millions of people who are crossing boundaries in order to seek education or work or to save themselves from political repression. Now, one of the aspects of that is that we have a high level of illegal migration. Now, the people living in Azerbaijan on a temporary basis are provided with full information by state bodies. They are documented. We have a single migration service system, which is electronic inter alia, and of course it is very important that our legislation be in line with international standards and requirements. And any imperfections in the law can result in uncontrolled or unregulated migration, and that makes it possible to combat illegal migration. Obviously, the migration service must protect national interest and national security, while at the same time provide migrants who are legal with all the rights and freedoms in accordance with the legislation of my country. Now, with a view to improving our national legislation and having a single legislative base, we have adopted a migration code, which entered into force in 2013. The need to protect the rights of migrants is reflected in this code. And when drafting the code, the recommendations of NGOs and of international organizations, and especially the UN, were taken into consideration. There are a number of events that have been organized to make sure that this functions properly. We have various measures introduced in cooperation with individual companies that may be hiring foreign nationals in a way that is not in line with the migration code. We make sure that individuals who come to work in Azerbaijan are not subject to any form of exploitation. But the full text of my statement will be made available subsequently. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And so the last speaker, the Human Rights Movement, Berdvino, Kyrgyzstan, you have the floor.
Thank you. Добрый день.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I represent the human rights organization Berdvino, Kyrgyzstan, which is part of the civil platform of Central Asia. And for 3 years now, we've been carrying out monitoring both internally and externally of migration throughout Central Asia. In Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, we see a net outflow of migrants into Russia and Kazakhstan. To date, carrying out monitoring, we've actually made available 2 reports on the OSCE site, so you can have a look yourself. The major finding is that migration is generally defined by women. As already been said, women migrating to Russia face significant problems. Allow me to draw your attention to the situation in Russia, where there is a reception area for migrants called Suvsih, where they have to stay for a long time without sufficient access to any kind of support. When they are detained there, they can go years without any contact, so that's a clear violation of their human rights. I'd like to echo what's been said by the Discrimination Center of Memorial, where there are cases where women are separated, mothers are separated from their children. There was a case of a young child dying, and the mother not being able to gain access. So we're seeing that the courts which ruled in this case were really not deciding fairly. The help which humanitarian organizations, the OSCE, try to bring in the border areas really, in many aspects, targets human trafficking. There aren't really sufficient resources, so there is a need in the border areas, as human rights defenders have said, to ensure that the rights of human rights defenders are recognized as well. Vitaly Panoramova Nigini from Tajikistan, many other human rights defenders, our own human rights defenders, have been deported. When we are talking about the rights of human rights defenders, I think it's a job of the ODIHR and the OSCE to ensure that such human rights defenders can do their job. There's also a trend that we're seeing that we're being not allowed to do our work. We've been focusing on countries where there's a large number of ethnic minorities and focusing on discrimination. We want to be able to do this work, and it's important that in doing that work we focus on the various kinds of discrimination against women and children from ethnic minorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we are moving on to the rights to reply. I have 4 on the list, and we'll go for 2 minutes for each right to reply. Firstly, Albania, followed by the Russian Federation. So, Albania, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would like to write the right of the reply to the statement of the Serbian representative and repeating again our position that the representative from Kosovo institution to participate in various meetings of the OSCE, since it would serve to strengthen the security in the region, the efficiency of the organization in its activities in Kosovo and through the region. Albania and many other OSCE participating states have requested Kosovo to be part of our forums. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologize for the small technical glitch as we get the timer going, but I believe we have enough time before 6 o'clock to complete another 3 rights to reply, so a superficial issue only. So next we have the Russian Federation, followed by the United States of America. The Russian Federation, the floor is yours.
Thank you. We would like to take advantage of our right to reply in connection with the statements made by the delegations of the United States and Ukraine and to state the following. Crimea is a part of the Russian Federation. Crimea became part of the Russian Federation as the result of a referendum that was held fully in accordance with international law. The right of peoples to self-determination is enshrined in the UN Charter and in international covenants on human rights. And the propagation of a myth of Russian aggression against Ukraine will weigh heavy on the conscience of those who engage in such myth-making. In the southeast of Ukraine, there is an internal civil war, an armed conflict, and the road to resolving that must be based on fulfillment of the Minsk agreements by the parties to the conflict, namely Donetsk, Lugansk, and the Kiev authorities. Now, more than 1 million Ukrainians are finding shelter from so-called Russian aggression by moving to the Russian Federation. So I think that the time has come to look reality in the face when it comes to Georgia, and finally to recognize the existence of 2 new sovereign independent states, namely South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we have the United States of America, followed by Poland. I am timing. We have it. Excellent. The United States of America. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Moderator. The United States would like to exercise its right of reply in response to the Russian Federation. First, we reject any suggestion that freedom of movement, including the right to leave any country, creates a right for foreign nationals to enter any country they wish. Sovereign states may regulate the entry and stay of foreign nationals consistent with their international obligations. Second, we agree with the Albanian comment that Kosovo should be represented in this body. Third, we do not recognize the attempted illegal annexation of Crimea. It remains part of Ukraine. That is a reality, as is the fact that South Ossetia and Georgia remain part of, or South Ossetia and Abkhazia remain part of Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we have Poland, followed by Ukraine. Poland, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like to exercise my right of reply and refer to remarks made by representative of the Tajik Islamic Renaissance Party. Firstly, let me inform you that decisions concerning granting entry permission to the Polish territory and the Schengen area are not arbitrary, but based on the Polish laws and regulations, including the adequate EU regulations. Asylum could be granted as a result of an individual administrative proceeding. Secondly, for the same reasons, I have no access to information on the individual case of the representative who took the floor today, and therefore the only thing I can suggest is to search some legal advice that is provided both by a Polish Office for Foreigners and plenty of non-governmental organizations helping migrants in Poland. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have the delegation of Ukraine, followed by Estonia on behalf of the EU. Ukraine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Well, first of all, I would like to say that it is Russian Federation who are distributing myths about so-called referendum on the territory of occupied Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, because this referendum, and everybody knows that, was made in the presence of 25,000 of Russian well-equipped and best soldiers ever. Second, I would like to make a point of order that would be the violation of rules of procedure, but I would like to pay attention of all the participants that the Russian representative, when expressing his right of reply, named the names of so-called republics, so DPR or LPR, said by Russia supported illegal armed formations in certain areas of Donbass that have been recognized as terrorist organizations by the national courts of my country. Their establishment is a direct result of the ongoing Russian aggression against Ukraine and occupation of certain areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine. Speaking about the status of Crimea, we would call again Russian Federation to fulfill the UN General Assembly Resolution 75/205, situation of human rights in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, Ukraine. And would like to recall that international organizations are called by this resolution to seek access to the Crimea, the territory, the sovereign territory of Ukraine, for the monitoring of those human rights violations that took place there. I thank you.
Thank you very much. So next we have Estonia on behalf of the EU, followed by Canada. Estonia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The European Union reiterates our strong condemnation of the illegal annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol to the Russian Federation, and the EU will not recognize it. Allow me to add also that the European Union also reiterates its firm support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Canada, followed by the last right to reply, Azerbaijan. So Canada, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Canada fully supports the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia within its internationally recognized borders. We are concerned by the actions of attempted borderization in the occupied areas of Georgia, which we do not recognize as independent states. And we are further concerned with the closing of crossing points and other actions which serve only to increase the hardship of local populations by further restricting their freedom of movement. We urge Russia and the de facto authorities of the occupied regions to refrain from and reverse actions that violate Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity and hinder efforts to achieve a peaceful resolution of the conflict. With regard to Crimea, Canada reiterates its strong condemnation of Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, which we do not and will not recognize. Crimea remains the sovereign territory of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. The list has just grown a little longer. So next I have Azerbaijan, followed by Serbia. Azerbaijan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. In response to the Armenian delegation statement, which was full of groundless accusations against my country, would like to state that Armenians and people of Armenian origin do not face any obstacles entering Azerbaijan. Thus, Armenian delegation participated in the first European Games and in the chess competition held in Baku in 2015. Moreover, during last and this year, many Armenians as well as individuals of Armenian origin traveled to Azerbaijan, including Bahir Avetian, Van Martirasyan, Oksana Altunyan, Eric Khachaturian, Lida Balasanyan, Suzan Jaginyan, and many others that I don't have their names in my statement. And I would like to draw the attention of the colleague from Armenia that Ms. Suzan Jaginyan is currently living in Baku. For having moved to Azerbaijan, the Armenian authorities took up Suzan Jaginyan's apartment in the city of Razdan in Armenia, and so her husband is facing difficulties with housing currently. And finally, with regard to the intervention of the US delegate as well as some NGO representatives on certain people who committed certain crime offenses not being able to leave the country, we would like to state that the imprisonment was substituted with release on probation by decision of competent courts. According to common legal practice, this is followed by certain conditions set forth by a court, including a travel ban. Therefore, we're not going to comment on the decision of the court and interfere in the law proceeding. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. So now we have Serbia, followed by Armenia. Serbia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. In regards to the statement made by the representative of Albania, I would hereby like to repeat the principal position of the Republic of Serbia that so-called Kosovo shouldn't be present here, as it is a part of Serbia and in accordance to the Security Council of the United Nations Resolution 1244 from the 1999 and the representation of temporary institutions of self-government of Pristina at the regional forums and forums in general, as it is agreed in principle, and the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina has not been agreed for this forum. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last right to reply, Armenia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. A short comment. Of course, I understand the surprise of the Azerbaijani distinguished colleague in reading a handful of names who had the luck to travel to Azerbaijan. They were part of propaganda against my country. Anyhow, the accusations come not from the Armenian side, but it is reflected in the ODIHR baseline study. It is reflected in the number of protests by OSCE participating states against ban of the entry of their citizens of Armenian origin to Azerbaijan. These are not accusations of my country. And a handful of names which were read out right now are a proof, the best proof that this is not about, sport events or any kind of other window dressing exercises, but it's a total ban for the entry of any Armenian from any country of the world to Azerbaijan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So as that concludes the rights to reply and the listed presentations for this afternoon, I would like to thank you all and to thank the speakers for their contributions this afternoon. I think these are very important topics and very, very current. And I think the interventions from speakers have really helped to highlight the importance of a good legal framework for freedom of movement and for migration management. They've helped to highlight the importance of freedom of movement for human rights defenders, as well as highlighting the importance of respecting human rights in all aspects of migration management, including in areas such as administrative detention. I feel that also the interventions have helped to highlight the importance of tolerance and non-discrimination, an area obviously which ODIHR cares about greatly, and the importance of ensuring that in terms of migrant integration into host societies, and that successful migrant integration really is of mutual benefit to both migrants and their host societies. So thank you very much for all of those contributions. And I will now hand back to our introducer, who will give her few final reflections as we wrap the session up. Thank you all. Ms. Paolo Lungi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Moderator. It was very interesting to hear all of these statements, which addressed very substantial issues relating to the freedom of movement and the rights of migrants. A number of very important aspects were picked up on, and I think that each state that has taken the floor has given a point of view that will enable national legislation and application of legislation to be improved. With regard to freedom of movement, a number of aspects were addressed on the freedom of movement of citizens themselves, and also the freedom of members of other countries to move, citizens of other countries to move in countries, and also in conflict zones. Now, the reasonable application of limitations to freedom of movement is something that needs to be enshrined in law and needs to be consistently applied in practice. With regard to the limitation on, because of ethnicity or religion, well, in that regard, that's not something which is sufficiently addressed in law, and we often see a subjective approach to resolving issues such as this. Coming back for a moment to freedom of movement, there were a number of countries relating to controls of travel, both on visas for those coming in and coming out, and certain limitations on the movement of their own citizens. There were very interesting questions on integration of laws relating to migrants. A number of things were emphasized here. One was working, or the need to work on preventing labor of illegal migrants, not signing illegal contracts, and ensure that migrants' interests are protected. Having sufficient data also on migrants to be able to protect their rights is also very important. Another very interesting thing was the application of migrant policy. Some countries talked about the work that they've been doing, and what's very important here is to have a multifaceted approach, and approach it not only as citizens leaving the country, but to see the flip side of that as well, because you also have the case of citizens coming back to the country. And often when they come back to the country, there isn't really a clear policy on the reintegration of those citizens who've been away in other countries of the OSCE or elsewhere. So it's necessary to have clear reintegration policies. In terms of other possible improvements to legislation, one thing that was emphasized was the reception centers for migrants. In some of these centers, it's said that there aren't the necessary conditions for the protection of migrants, particularly vulnerable groups, pregnant women, children, individuals with certain disabilities. So it's very important that when these centres are created, they follow the recommendations which exist in the European Union. There are certain standards on the conditions for such centres. As a number of speakers noted, access to a healthcare system for people in such centres is very important. Also, in principle, children shouldn't be detained in such centres, and if they are, for whatever reason, then they need to be able to have access to education. The issues relating to freedom of movement, integration, and the ways in which we can improve our laws require the application of a best practice. We, in doing that, will achieve the results we desire. I think today has given the opportunity for many countries to address this issue, and having shared the experience, get a better understanding of what the best examples of national practice are. I hope we can continue in this manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Paola Lungi. I really felt it was very helpful to have perspectives from somebody who is both an analyst and a practitioner. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you again to all the speakers and to our audience. A particular thanks, of course, to the interpreters who help us understand each other. We now have a number of side events, although they will not begin immediately from 6. And I have a reminder to invite you all again to the Chairmanships closing party, which will take place at 8 o'clock this evening at the Theater Capitol Club. Participants can collect their invitations from the delegation's pigeonholes and the tables with publications. And transport to this wonderful evening event will be provided, should you wish it, from here at 19:45, 7:45, from the stadium here at Gate 1. And that will be buses that will take you directly to the venue. Thanks again.